So thank you everyone for coming. I hope the lunch is good and that it's worthwhile of your time. My name is Sonia Hall. I am the president and CEO of a nonprofit organization here in Kansas called BioKansas. We're part of one of the largest trade organizations in the world for the biosciences, and that's the larger organization called Bio. So today I'm going to tell you a little bit about the experiences that I've had in my life that have kind of shaped how I've navigated my career path. So I'm often asked to talk about my career journey, and while I'm always happy to share my experiences and my story, I also hesitate a little bit because I think it's important for graduate students and postdocs to understand that there's no one way to get to where either I am or any other professional is. So integrated into this talk, I'm just going to provide you some information on ways that you can create and define your own journey as well. And if you need any additional information or have follow-up questions, I encourage you to reach out to me. My email address is just my first name at biokansas.org. Let me pull out the keyboard. So I grew up in the inner city of Boston. I walked around this really lively city, saw all of the academic institutions. People in lab coats were not very far from view at any given time at all. And I always hoped and dreamed that I'd have the opportunity to go into academia. But coming from a very underprivileged family and growing up in a household with a single parent, it didn't really seem like it was going to be in the cards for me. But I never lost sight of what that was. But it informed the way that I took my first few steps out of high school. So rather than entering immediately into college, I got married and I started working in corporate America. I worked in the tech sector, I worked in telecom, and I worked in the nonprofit arts as well. And so I had these really varied experiences, basically because we were just trying to figure out where we fit into the grand scheme of the world and where our talents, my husband and I, would best be served. Through that journey, I didn't realize at the time, but I collected a variety of really valuable skills. I learned the basics of project management and then expanded upon those. I definitely learned how to juggle my time to a certain extent, became very good at communicating with people in both written and verbal formats because I didn't really have a choice, right? I didn't have an education to fall back on to ensure that I had a clear path forward. So it was completely riding on my shoulders that I had to be capable and competent in whatever it was that I was doing at that given time. And my husband made it a little bit more challenging because he was an IT engineer and his company moved us around the country for about 5 years, roughly every 6 months. And so every 6 months it was going back on the job market for me and redefining what it was I was able to do. So you can kind of imagine how challenging that was. We finally landed here in Overland Park, Kansas, and there was a community college, Johnson County Community College, and it was just a few steps down from my door, like I could walk from our house. And so I was really bored being a stay-at-home mom when both my children went into school. And so I said, well, I'm going to go down to the community college. I'll take a class, whatever. No big deal, right? So I walk into this biology course and I'm hooked. I feel so alive for the first time in so many years. This curiosity that I've always had about genetics and basic biological mechanisms is finally being fed information that I never knew existed. So at the end of that semester, I decided that I was going to transfer to KU. I filled out my application, completely nervous, knowing that I don't really belong, right? I'm this non-traditional student. It's been 10 years since I graduated from high school. And I'm like, how am I ever going to fit in? And they accept me because, it's a numbers thing. You're just looking at a transfer application. It wasn't like I had to do anything significant to get in. But I arrived on campus for my transfer student orientation. And I sit down with the counselor. And he says to me, what are we going to do with you? you're so far behind. You're never going to catch up. And I was crushed and absolutely devastated, completely humiliated as well, right? I was like, everything that I was trying to convince myself I didn't need to worry about was just validated that I did need to worry about it when I walked into those doors. So that kind of framed the way that I interacted with my entire experience as an undergraduate at the University of Kansas. It wasn't the only incident that I had where it was like, yeah, clearly you don't belong. But it shaped me, and I take it for what it's worth. I also made sure that he was the advisor that signed off on my paperwork that I could graduate to, but had to make sure I did that. But this complexity of navigating my undergraduate experience with these two small children and a husband in tow actually proved to be probably one of the best things that I did moving forward, because those baseline project management and time management skills that I had to depend on for my job day to day, all of a sudden became the integral part of how I either was going to or was not going to succeed in this environment. I learned my coursework by teaching my children. So I wove into being a mother, also being a student. And those two things became inseparable. Now that my children are both in college, it's been quite beneficial for them as well they really know how to study and to learn and what a realistic expectation they should have of themselves versus an unrealistic expectation. Although the struggle is still real some days, for sure. But going through this experience with them as well didn't just help shape me as a student and as an academic, but it shaped my values as a human being as well. I knew what it felt like to not belong or fit in somewhere. And I made a commitment at that point in time that I was going to create a community, as small or as tiny as it was. I was going to do something so that other people walking in the footsteps behind me wouldn't have that same experience. They would know that there was a place where they belonged and where they could make meaningful contributions. That decision and that commitment to do that while I was an undergraduate student in KU has probably been one of the most defining, pivotal decisions in my career. Everything that I do has been based around making a community for others. So as I said originally, I think it's really hard to say that everybody should follow the same direct path to get to where they are, right? I think that our careers are really this reflection of our life experiences. We're shaped by so many factors in our life, and it's usually the people in our life that have the most substantial impact, right? So for me, it was my children and then other individuals throughout the path that kind of came into context. So within this professional context, I guess you could say we're really shaped by the network of people that are around us. Here you're looking at a picture of mentors that have been instrumental in helping me navigate the decision-making process that got me to where I am today. They've helped me navigate small decisions step by step that slowly refined my direction and my path. And so to really leap beyond where we are now, we have to expand our network to broaden those life experiences that are so essential to say, this is who I want to be and this is who I am as a scientific professional, and to put those things into action and to move you forward. And I realize, we hear all the time, network, network, network. But I guess I never really thought about what I was doing as networking. Rather, I stayed focused on building relationships, finding meaning in those everyday interactions, and surrounding myself by people with shared interests, shared values, and goals. I've always wanted to be surrounded by a community, and I want to help build that community. And that, fundamentally in business, I guess, means building that network, right? But building that network or, community, whichever one you prefer, really took me down some very unexpected pathways as I was navigating my career. As you can probably imagine, and you probably know with the resources that you have available here on campus, careers in the life sciences are very vast, and they fall across a variety of different sectors of the workforce, right? So there's a lot of opportunities, and your training probably seems really daunting at times and even insurmountable on certain days. But the challenges that you're facing and that you're working to overcome and tackle, they're equipping you to be extremely successful in a variety of different settings, right? So when you leave here, you're going to be capable and competent in a technical way, but you're also going to be very capable and competent as a broad-reaching professional as well. And so I hope you don't lose sight of that, and that you find a team of mentors behind you that can help you navigate things if you ever feel as if you're starting to stumble or fall backward. Sorry, hobbling around here a little bit, so I apologize. So I think also how graduate students and postdocs navigate their career prospect, it's going to vary dramatically from person to person. And it's often due to that variation that we have in those individual experiences and how they shape how we want to interact with the scientific enterprise more globally. As scientists training in these highly specialized academic institutions, after spending decades of training in academic environments, we can usually visualize what it means to have an academic career. Would you agree? But there's this natural network that you've built. The steps seem clear to how to get from where you are to where you want to be. And you're surrounded by these professionals who've also navigated that path. And those academic careers can be really quite rewarding. And so I think it's important to not lose sight of that. But when I was a graduate student at the University of Kansas, most of my colleagues, I would actually say all of my colleagues, were interested in careers in academia. But soon after I transitioned over to my postdoc position at UMass Medical School, I found that there were populations of students that actually were coming into graduate school. The majority of the students that were coming into UMass Medical, they were actually interested in careers in industry, the majority of them. It was like over 70%. And I thought, wow, that's so dramatically different. And it was the first time that I had ever really been around a group of colleagues that didn't really have an interest in an academic career. And that was kind of exciting for me because I knew that while an academic career was very fulfilling and rewarding, it wasn't where I saw myself fitting in. I knew that I thrived in the nonprofit environment, somewhere where I could blend service and advocacy, my passion for science and education, and those broader scientific endeavors all together. But even though I was surrounded by these peers who now had this additional interest, right, going into industry, I still felt like I was stepping into this path that was far less traveled. And it felt quite isolating as well. So through my advocacy efforts, working with the future of research, I did know that my experiences weren't unique and I wasn't alone. So here I'm showing you a figure from a paper from Hedgenis et al. And Gary McDowell, who was the previous executive director for the future of research, is also an author on this paper. That's how our organization was involved. And they basically looked at census data and they identified, it's a really beautiful paper if you're interested in career outcomes for PhD trained scientists. They looked at the percentage of biological and medical scientists that were working either in academic, private, or public careers. And so you can look at this going across the different decades, and you can see that, since the 1990s, less than 50% of PhD trained scientists are actually working in academia. Now, if you look at all of the scientists working in academia, there's a huge percentage of them that are postdocs, right? And so a lot of these numbers are skewed heavily towards the academic side because of people that are in training positions as well. And so it's kind of interesting to see that trend. And you see that the numbers are continuing to get smaller and smaller. And it's not so much that academic positions are becoming fewer and fewer, but the advancements in science have been so dramatic over the years because of the discoveries made within academia that the investments by the private sector are growing and growing and growing. We're moving more technologies into the marketplace and into the clinics, right? And so there's a big demand for people to go into industrial positions. And so that's part of the reasoning behind it. It's not just a shrink a shrinking of academic positions, but more of a growth is having the larger impact on that. So let's see. So I think I have here next some career paths. So these are 8 broad career pathways that we often find PhD trained scientists working in. So there's business and commercial development. So really, thinking about the business side of things and products, academic research and administration, research in academia and government, science education and outreach, your research and industry, which is a lot of your R&D type of positions. You have policy, legal, and regulatory affairs, public health, medical testing, and patient care, and then science communication and publishing. Those are really broad. So over 64% of biomedical PhD trained scientists back in 2014 were working in one of these 8 pathways that was not the research in academia and government pathway. So that's definitely the majority there, which I think is really interesting. But when you have so many options in front of you, just like I did when I'm sitting here in my postdoc position, right? It's really hard to figure out how to get the skills and training you need to be flexible and adaptable to fit into any of those career pathways, right? Because your technical training probably doesn't necessarily apply in a position like what I have, right? And basically what would be research administration almost. Or I also do policy work and science communication, right? And so you can see how these careers just kind of blend across. So I think, one thing that I'll leave you with too is have conversations with a broad number of professionals. Coming to things like this and having it available right here on your campus is really valuable because you can start to hone in on where your interests are and what those specific skill sets are that you need as well. When I was at UMass Medical School, I started in a research postdoc. I was working on the metabolic regulation of autophagy and how it was related to development and tumorigenesis. But when I was in that position, I realized I didn't feel fulfilled. It just wasn't striking that chord of like, I'm doing something that makes better community and advances the greater good of the people around me. I was also really involved in advocacy and policy work at more of the national level. And I found that I was getting a lot of energy from those types of things. I felt excited and rewarded. So I actually transitioned into a postdoc position training with Cynthia Furman at UMass Medical School in academic and research administration. And so not only are there careers here, but there's training opportunities as well. And if somebody is interested in going into academic administration, Cynthia is hiring a postdoc. She asked me to say that. So if you want information on that, you can let me know. Does anybody have any questions about these pathways? I always have to show them because I feel like it would be irresponsible not to. All right, so as I said, I've had this wandering kind of pathway where I've ended up where I am, and nobody has that direct shot usually to where they want to land. So I'm going to tell you about a few opportunities that I took advantage of that really shaped the experiences that I needed to get to where I am today. But also embedded in here, I'll tell you some of the examples, hopefully, that you see that exist for you to participate in as well. So professional membership organizations, there's a lot of similarities in them and also a lot of differences. They're typically oriented to a specific trade or a profession or a field or a discipline, and they're governed by members of a community. So naturally, I was drawn to that, right? I did a lot of work serving on boards and committees within the Genetic Society of America, the Future of Research, and I worked closely with a lot of other nonprofit organizations as well and started a few science outreach types of programs too. I will say that the organizations are almost always really small and lean, and they can't fulfill their mission for their members without the support of volunteer members within their organization. For early career scientists, this presents an ideal opportunity for you to get leadership experience, to really broaden your network, and to build this body of evidence that shows that you're capable of leading a project and leading people. So I'd encourage you to strongly consider doing this. These engaged members in our organizations, they're critical for our success. the services and the benefits of the different organizations, of course, they vary. And so if you're looking for an opportunity to serve on a committee or on a board, you want to think about what it is that you're interested in. And you want to also think about, okay, how do I want to define myself as a scientific professional? If you want to be seen as an advocate for, modernizing graduate training, then that really informs the types of committees that you might want to serve on, right? But if you're interested in, being known as a strong advocate for increasing research funding, you probably want to be on more of like a policy type of committee, right? And so those are the types of things that you want to think about a lot. If you go to a conference during the year and you enjoy that conference, chances are the organization that's putting that on has a committee that you would fit into, whether it be focused on a specific scientific content area or policy advocacy or communication. It's a good place to start. Just ask questions of the staff that's there. So they're also a really great way to broaden your network, being involved in these professional organizations. If you're involved in a committee or a board, those individuals are typically leaders in your field. Right? Some of them will be Nobel laureates, right? Some of them will be leading editors of journals that you're going to want to publish your work in. And if you work closely with them and you develop that relationship and they become part of your network, they're also always more than happy to write letters of recommendation for you. And having letters of recommendation from people that you haven't directly trained with and that work outside of your institution are extremely powerful, right? Whether it comes for, when you're applying for funding, or say you want to apply for a policy fellowship or something like that, it can be really quite impactful. That was one of the things that I did that really allowed my applications to stand apart, is I had a broad ranging reach of professionals that could speak to what my capabilities and competencies were. So if I wanted to do something in policy, I had somebody who had that portfolio behind their name. If I wanted to do something in science education, I had that as well. So that's something to kind of think about. If you don't want to invest that much time in building, that really deep, meaningful network, at least go to networking events, right? They can be uncomfortable, right? But it's a brief amount of time that you're there. Go early. If you find yourself typically being shy or a little bit introverted and not wanting to break into a crowd, if you get there early, right, everybody wants to find somebody to talk to. And so you don't have to intervene in those groups that are already settled in. People will come to you. And so that was always one of the things that I did. I can be extroverted, but I'm really an introvert at heart. So I prefer if people come to me. And when you're in these situations too, when you're talking to individuals who, whether they're in academia or not, I think it's really important to ask more questions of the individual that you're talking to so you can understand what their background is. Don't make assumptions, right? So many people, I'll come in and I'll have my badge on that says that I'm with a nonprofit, and they assume that I know absolutely nothing about their science. And I can't tell you the number of times that I've been talked to about something that I've worked on. Like there's no possible way that I could ever understand it, right? And that's definitely not the situation that you want to be in. So just ask more questions. People usually like to talk about themselves. And for us being earlier in our careers, that's extremely beneficial. So just ask questions, listen, and think about how you can connect with them outside of your work or what you need. So here's my slide on the committees themselves. I include this because I think it's important to tell you, if you decide to join a committee, as I said, there's a lot of value in doing these things, but you need to be realistic about what you can commit, right? Ask a lot of questions. The committees are normally project focused. So if you're on an awards committee, right, you're selecting awards for people, but you want to be very careful and ask about how much time you would be required to commit if you were going to be involved in this. For every new commitment that you want to make as a professional, especially if you're early in your career, you want to make sure that you can fulfill that. So kind of get that in writing and think carefully about it. Also ask questions before you begin think about what their expectations are for you, and think about what those deliverables are going to be on the other side of it, right? If it doesn't weigh out that that's a benefit to the time that you're investing for what you want to get on the other side, find a different opportunity. Yeah, you also want to determine how you're going to account for the time that you spent on your service. What are you going to have to show for it afterwards, right? So if you're on a communications committee, you probably have some newsletter or something that you contributed to, and you can show somebody that. If you were on a policy committee, you'd probably want to summarize a report of what your contributions were, right? And put that in your portfolio. And you want to set time limits on the amount of time that you're willing to commit on any given task that the committee would assign to you as well. And once you see that the investment of your time versus the return is starting to diminish, take a step back, right? Reevaluate whether or not you're in the right place. I really see the value in committees. You know, when I was a postdoc, I saw this as a huge opportunity that was being underutilized by professional organizations. There's so many organizations out there that you hear saying things like, you know, we advocate for early career scientists. We want to support early career scientists, and they're happy to give you a travel award, but they don't necessarily want to have you engaged in their decision-making process that determines where that organization or field is going to go in the next 5 or 10 years, right? So I took that observation, I took the value of the contributions that I had made, and I did this assessment of what is it that they would want from me? What is it that I'm going to get on the other side of it? And I saw that they didn't wash out the way that I wanted them to. So I went to the board of directors and I proposed that we create a series of committees that are all composed of early career scientists. I wanted to have early career scientists at the table making decisions and guiding that organization so that it spoke to the actual interests of early career scientists in a high level way, not just passively, right? You can give me a $500 travel award, I won't say no, but right, that's going to help me on like 1 to 3 days. It's not going to shape how I perceive where I fit into the grand scheme of things within the scientific enterprise. I wanted to find a way to provide opportunities that graduate students and postdocs saw that they were empowered. So I proposed these committees. We created 5 committees. One was focused on policy, science communication and outreach was another one, career and professional development, equity and inclusion, and then we had a steering committee that kind of oversaw their efforts, collected data from the surrounding community, integrated into the projects that those subcommittees worked on. This particular program that I pitched to the Genetic Society of America became their leadership and professional development program. Now they have early career scientists not just sitting in this leadership structure, but they have early career scientists on every one of their committees that have voting powers. They have early career scientists that are on their board that span the entire hierarchy of the academic training system. And graduate students are represented, graduate students and postdocs are represented in every one of their planning events that they do. So having these committees and having the voices of graduate students and postdocs guiding the conversations that were happening showed the organization that they had valid things to contribute, right? And that they were extremely valuable. And that when they increased engagement at this level, that they were able to reach a broader audience and have a more meaningful impact for all scientists, regardless of their career levels as well. That allowed me to really shape my career. It was that program there that gave me kind of this international reach and access to people that normally I wouldn't have access to at all. Our participants were from all around the world. I was being invited to give talks all over the place. I started working closely with the State Department, speaking at academic institutions through their lecture series and things like that as well. So I went to places like Budapest, Hungary. I've been to Turkey. I've been, through most of Eastern Europe, and then gave 2 talks in the UK within like 2 years. And so making a commitment to do something like this, right? It can really shape your career because it aligns so nicely with my values. I fully maximize the benefit of that. And I wouldn't be where I am today if I hadn't done that. So anyways, that's one example, things you can do. Something else you can do is organize an event, kind of like this, right? Putting something like this together. I'm sure the administrators that help to put these events together are probably always willing to have somebody send out communications or reach out to speakers or something like that, or take suggestions. But this is a good way for you to get visibility within the community. It's always a nice compliment when somebody invites you to give a talk. And exposes you to a much larger audience, minimal usually. This is probably more important if you're wanting a career outside of academia, science communication, publishing, somewhere in the nonprofit world. This would be highly beneficial for you. A lot of the students that I know that I helped support in organizing events are now colleagues of mine that work in either academic administration positions or in the nonprofit sector. Let's see. So becoming an advocate. This is an area where I think all scientists need to be engaged on. Regardless of whether you want an academic career or you want to work in policy, we have to be aware of how policies and legislations impact the scientific ecosystem, period, no questions. A lot of students or postdocs, people that are early in their career, will think that, you know, advocacy really has to be targeted at the federal level, right, nationally. But you'd be surprised at the number of policies that exist just within your own academic institution, right? And those decisions are made every semester. There's decisions made that impact the way you're trained, or, you know, what the research experience is like within the institution. And so I think it's really important to get involved, not so much at the national level per se, but at the institutional policy level, right? And you can grow from there if you decide that you like it, but it's accessible, right? A lot of the times they'll appreciate having, you know, some input or some steering from their own grad students and postdocs as well. Working on policy really kind of refined my interest on how I could contribute. Spending time at Capitol Hill, interacting with senators who I would think would never give me the time of day, was very informative. That because I was a scientist, they saw that I automatically brought something of value to the table. So me as a third-year graduate student, my first time on Capitol Hill, feeling like, oh my gosh, what am I doing? I left there with so much confidence. I knew that, you know, there were things that I could follow up with these politicians on that they wanted and that they needed, right, in order to make informed decisions. It was really quite rewarding. If you have any interest in being involved in policy or just like dabbling in that at all, BioKansas will have 3 events this year that are related to policy. We'll have 2 in Topeka. One of them is specifically for graduate students, and we ask you to come and present your work. We do that in partnership with your academic institution and a few others. And then we also fly some of our members to Washington, D.C. to advocate on the Hill with us for what we call Bio Fly-In. And that's really great. And also, if you want to do a tour of your lab, we can help set that up with like your local senator or state representative. I was just in Senator Blunt's office yesterday, and they're always interested in touring the different labs and facilities. So anyways, keep that in mind. So as I said before, there is that small staff issue at these professional organizations as well, similar to BioKansas. So it's challenging a lot of the times for us to have this continual flow of communication out from our organization to the membership. So that's also a great opportunity, pretty low bar effort way to get involved. You can, you know, write just blog posts or articles or contribute content to a newsletter. But the thing that's really great about this is if you author something and it's published, right, that has, it's very translatable, whether in academia or outside of it. That is definitely a piece of evidence you can take on the job market. List on your CV, list on your resume, right, and check that box. And it also can show the quality of your writing. And I think probably the most beneficial thing is that you also have professional editors that you work with. So it looks very polished by the time that it's done, and you're familiar with that process. and what it looks like. But again, think about what you want to accomplish and how much time you'll commit, because some writing projects can get a little out of hand. So you want to be careful about that. We have several training programs that we're developing. One of them is a scientific writing program, and it's specifically around the thesis. And so we're asking for some graduate students and postdocs to make contributions as authors to some of our chapters. So if that's something that interests you, definitely let me know. But again, this is something that I integrated into my career. I used to write blog posts about the different career opportunities that existed for geneticists. That was kind of how I first started exploring who the people were that were working in the areas that interested me. And it was definitely a comfort to know that I had connections that I could reach out to when I started stepping further away. And then I think this is the last one that I have, but professional development programs are also a really great thing. Where you can not just build those skills and broaden your network, but you can get some really deep, in-depth training. If you're wanting to move into industry, this is almost an essential step that you need to take, is go out and take some programs that are, dedicated to things like process mapping or presentation skills and design. If you can do those things within the context of industry, that'll be important, especially for the interview process, right? Their interview looks very different than what your academic, tenure track position interview would look like. And so being able to participate in those types of programs is helpful. They're often offered in multiple formats, so you can do them in a conference in the form of a workshop. And there's more and more remote programs. So a lot of things that are done by Zoom. All of the programs I did when I was at the Genetic Society of America were all virtual and accessible to people around the world. You still have your traditional in-person classroom trainings as well. And they'll range anywhere from, a 1-hour session to a multi-week type of program. And so you just have to decide what it is that you want and what you want to get out of it, and what kind of weight you can carry and commitment as well. And these are things that you should be thinking about early, and you should be thinking about them often, right? I think the reason I was able to move through my career as quickly as I did is because I did this continually all throughout the process. You've heard me tell you about, working on committees and on boards when I was a graduate student, organizing programs, right, for science outreach and education. If you do them in bits and pieces along the way, not only do you refine what that path looks like and how you're going to move forward on it, but you build up that body of evidence along the way. And then you can more quickly move through your career. So I spent, I did my undergraduate in 4 years, and then I did my graduate work in 3 years and 9 months. I finished my PhD, and then my postdoc, my first postdoc I did, it was 14 months. My second postdoc I did, it was 12 months. Took my first career step at the Genetic Society of America and stayed there for about 2 years. And now I've transitioned into this position at BioKansas as president and CEO. Am I capable of being the president and CEO of Cerner or of Google? No. No, I am not. But I do have the skill set to do this job well, right? And I can still continue to build up that skill set to move to whatever that next step is. So I'm not saying that I've accomplished everything and this is the be all end all, but it is a quick movement through those paces because I participated in programs and did the things that I needed to do to make sure that I had the skills I needed to move quickly. When you're a non-traditional student and you're going through your training at the same time that your children are going through grade school, right? You have to kind of figure out a way to pick up the pace. I defended my PhD 6 months before my daughter graduated from high school. That was horrifying, but exciting at the same time. Anyways, for programs, the list goes on and on. There's so many options out there for you. If you have questions, feel free to contact me. As I said, I'm happy to connect you with my staff that has a really broad reaching knowledge of the opportunities in this area as well. Right. So with that, I'll just basically close and say, you know, don't shy away from seeing organizations like ours, BioKansas, as a way to kind of shape and define your future. Know that there isn't one pathway to get to where you want to be. You know, I tried to sprinkle in a little bit of the experiences that I had that I feel like were important to me, but I don't like to focus on those because this is your journey and it's your path, right? And you get to decide what success means for you. Nobody else can do that. And so I hope that these things were helpful. The major takeaways that I can leave you with are to be involved, participate fully, learn as much as you can, and lead when the opportunity is created by you to do so. So make sure that you take the time to define and shape your own future. Don't let somebody else do it for you. And most importantly, surround yourself by a good community of people, like-minded people that share your values. And that'll ensure that you have that personal satisfaction as you make all of those steps. And you get the pretty slide at the end. So anyways, I thank you for your time. And if you have questions, I'll stick around to answer them. And as I said, reach out to me by email as well. Yeah.
Can you touch a little on the networking opportunities? I think BioKansas hosts a few of them. Other ones.
Yeah, so as far as BioKansas is concerned, we have quarterly bio breaks. So this is a great opportunity to meet a lot of CEOs and high-level executives that work in industry or within the nonprofit sector around the region. We also have some faculty that are on our board as well that are there. A lot of founders of companies attend our bio breaks too. They're usually free or a pretty minimal cost, like $10 for students to register. If funding is an issue for you being able to attend, email me and we'll figure out a way to get you there. Those are probably our most popular gatherings that we have. There's a barbecue that we do every year with a company called GBA. We help support KC Ribs. They do a lot of really fantastic events in the area too. That's a great way to network. This year we're doing a series of community forums as well. These are a little bit more, they seem to be drawing a little bit more of an academic crowd because we're having conversations about where a certain area of biosciences is, where it needs to be, and how we're going to get there. And we discuss that as a community. We're using that data to inform our strategic plan, but that's a way to network in for some people in a way that they're more comfortable as well. And then we end it with more of a social. So BioKansas, for some reason, really likes to have beer and wine. So there's beer and wine at pretty much everything we do. Yeah. So those are a few. Does that help? Okay. Additional questions? Yes.
So as a graduate student, I'm sure you being a mother as a graduate student, like talking about mental bandwidth and kind of like how did you figure out how to prioritize kind of like for me, like my experience or kind of like priority one, and then like beyond that, like I guess strategies to kind of extend yourself in these different directions. Because I'm interested in a lot of the stuff that you're talking about, but I find it hard to like navigate how to do that for myself.
Yeah, completely makes sense. So a few things that I think are helpful. One, I set clear limits for myself. So that if I am in the lab by 8 o'clock in the morning, then I am leaving the lab by 4:30 that day. And anything that needs to be accomplished has to be accomplished during that time. I also had to become really comfortable with communicating with my advisor that if there was something that I needed that took like 5 minutes or less, that it was okay for me to ask for that, right? So it was like, hey, Rob, would you mind changing the apple juice plate so I can get some, Drosophila embryos for tomorrow? And he would do that before he left at, say, 5:30. So it would help with the timing of the experiments. So one thing was just defining those limits and communicating that to him, that was what I could do, right? I mean, I did come in on the weekends. I would come in at night and things like that. But I would come in no earlier typically than 7:30, 8 o'clock in the morning. And then I would leave when my children were done for the day. Another thing that I did was I set aside every week Friday afternoons 3 hours. That was my planning time. And I would say, okay, where am I in the experiments that I have? And where do I need to be to stay on track by the end of the week? And I would map that out. And my days were broken down sometimes into 15-minute increments for the different steps in my protocols and kind of how they overlapped with each other. And it just kept me going. I was able to power through it. So essentially what I did was I took a project management approach that I learned in business and I applied it in the laboratory setting. And I'm happy to sit down with you one day and talk about that and show you some of the tools that exist if that's ever of interest. I use with my staff now a system called Smartsheet. It's just a basic project management system that allows you to integrate all of your resources, you know, what you want your deliverables to be, what your timeline is, and allows you to plan it in a way that it's somewhat automated. So it integrates with Google Docs, with Outlook Calendar. If there's an app, even Slack, you name it, you can integrate it with Smartsheet. So it was really quite helpful. And there was something else that you had asked too. Did I get everything? I feel like there's one other thing you asked. Oh, I know what it was. So as far as figuring out how to fit in all these other things that you're interested in. Okay. So I told myself that I would commit no more than 2 to 5 hours. The thing that I found that was so key is if I took the leadership role and whatever those commitments were, I got to plan the schedule, which was fantastic for me, right? Especially having all these other things to balance. There's data that shows that when you're doing volunteer work, the sweet spot for the return on invested time is somewhere between 2 and 5 hours. When you've exceeded 5 hours, it's actually somewhat detrimental to your career. So each week you should never exceed 5 hours. I would give myself 2 hours. I would set that aside normally early on a Monday or late on a Monday afternoon. And that was the time that I had for those types of things. I would respond to a few emails early in the morning each day during the week, but other than that, I didn't really focus on whatever that project or initiative was unless it was within those hours. So I just became very rigid about how I planned everything. Yes. Yeah, so right now we're in the strategic planning process. We do have a survey out where we're asking for input. I don't think I have any respondents from KU Med, but even if you just go onto like our Twitter account, you can find a link to our strategic planning survey. Any input on that would be really valuable. There are a few things that I know are non-negotiable for me leading this organization. One of them is we're going to be an organization that integrated into everything we do. We're going to find ways to make careers in science and the pathways towards them more equitable and inclusive, non-negotiable. The next thing that we want to do is raise the visibility of the contributions that come out of this region to the worldwide scientific enterprise. Research that happens here at KU Med, right, doesn't just impact our local community, right? It has a global impact. How long it takes to reach that global impact is dependent upon what that discovery is, or what that product is that moves into the marketplace. So those are some of the things that I know we definitely want to do. The other thing that I'm hoping we can accomplish is find more meaningful engagement with academic institutions. Historically, we've been very industry focused. We'll always have a focus on industry, but we need to be sure that we're providing meaningful opportunities, engaging with academic institutions in ways that they find meaningful as well. Because like I said, 64% of biomedical PhDs aren't going to stay in academia. They're going to end up in the walls of our companies, right? And so it's important that we're able to, one, retain that talent here in the region and to show you what types of opportunities exist, and to understand who you are and where you want to be and how it is that we can facilitate that path with you. Any other questions? All right, well, thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.